we're going to be getting into chapter 3. Now, this is not to put anybody in a report. I'm just curious. How many of you have not started your economic systems exercise yet? Right, show of hands. Guys, what we're going to do, we're going to spend some time on Friday in class giving you an opportunity to work on that with me giving you feedback as well. So on Friday in class, we're going to be spending some time working on the economic systems exercise, which is due Friday night. So if you haven't started it yet, fear not, you've got time. Also, the online discussion is due on Friday as well, Friday night. People were asking me about this discussion. I posted a video that was about how cobalt is extracted in Africa, and essentially the use of child labor in parts of Africa for extracting very hazardous items. And I'm asking you to give me your input on it. You don't have to respond to 2 other students. I just need your input by midnight on that day. Guys, a couple other things. Up next, we're going to be doing the top 10 assignment, which I'll be talking about in class next week. And after we get done with chapter 3, we're going to be doing our first test in this class. Again, all multiple choice, true or false. And guys, please have something in front of you to take notes. Make me feel good. Guys, also want to remind you, this Friday, you have your first opportunity, or second opportunity, I should say, for extra credit. This is going to be in JFK at 7 p.m. Dr. Michael Uslan, the guy who created the Batman film franchise, you can get CES for it, and you can get 2 bonus points on your first test. Please come to this event. It's going to be a big deal. And you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions of the man who basically invented the superhero film genre as we know it. It's a pretty big deal. Guys, there are a couple other CES opportunities that are coming up. Actually, one I don't have listed here, I should have had listed. I didn't think to put it on this morning. We're going to have a suicide awareness walk today at 5 o'clock. Is it 5 o'clock? Am I correct with that time? 5 o'clock, and then that will also lead to a candlelight ceremony. That'll all be happening in the chapel in the mall. There's been emails going out about it. All that information is available. I encourage you, even if you don't know the folks who passed, to make a presence there and show support to the community, or if you know somebody else that you've lost due to suicide or death. I'll be teaching at that time, but I may take a break in class to come out and be a part of the vigil as well. Tomorrow night in Paddle 110, we're going to have another extra credit opportunity. Well, not extra credit. This one's just CES. It's a panel discussion talking about why Batman doesn't kill, or should he kill. One of the other issues with Batman's ethics. Batman's a billionaire. Is he making best use of his money by funding a one-man war on crime? Here's a little trivia question for you. Well, first, a question about what you've seen. How many of you have seen Batman Begins or The Dark Knight? Okay, most of you have seen those movies. Forbes magazine did an analysis of how Batman's arsenal and crime-fighting techniques work in those movies. If you had to guess, based on those movies, how much money would Bruce Wayne have to have in his bank account to be able to live like that? I'm sorry? It's a lot. How much do you think? Definitely in the billions. What are we talking? What would his corporate worth have to be? Take a guess. Yes? Oh, keep going. How much do you think? How many billions does Bruce Wayne have to be worth? Bigger than 6. So we got to keep going. How much do you think?
60 billion.
So close. It's about 80. He'd have to be worth 80 billion to be able to afford a personal arsenal, a mountain with a cave in it for his hideaway, and to be able to fight his one-man war on crime. The questions are there better things he could be doing with his money in society? So that's some of the ethical issues we'll be taking on. That's in Paddle 110 tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. CES is going to be a great time. And again, reminder, Friday you get 2 bonus points and you get CES for coming to see Dr. Michael Uslan. Any questions about these events, guys? By the way, if you're a member of a club or a sports team, on Friday we're going to be doing a parade at 5 o'clock around the campus, leading to the Superhero Carnival in JFK. If you are in a club or a sports team and would like to be part of that parade, we'd love to have you to show some school spirit. If you're a cosplayer, if you've got a superhero costume or you like wearing costume, put on your costume, get in the parade with us. It's going to be meeting at 5 o'clock in the Stokes parking lot. We'd love to have some sports teams be part of that. I actually put in a request to athletics to see if they'd even make it worth Frankie bucks. We'll see what happens there. Guys, just a reminder, we're going to be covering the economic systems exercise on Friday a little bit more in depth. We covered it in class earlier this week. If you haven't finished it yet, I'll give you some time in class on Friday to continue working on it. But I want to start off with some current events, something I think is pretty interesting. Amazon just announced this in the news. They're going to be starting a program called Amazon Care. Check this out. Amazon is allowing their employees to opt in to a new system where their health care will actually be provided by their own company. So if you have the sniffles, or if you've got the flu, you have remote access to health care. If you need a visit, a home nurse will come and visit you in your home. Why is this such a big deal that a company like Amazon is looking at providing its own health care to employees? Why is this such a big deal, guys? What do you think? Yes?
Exactly the opposite of socialized healthcare.
Yeah, this is capitalized healthcare. We're talking about essentially an employer literally taking over healthcare. Why else is this a big deal, guys? From this side of the room, why is this a big deal? Yes?
It gives less jobs to the people that are in companies that care for people.
That's exactly right. We're talking about a company now saying instead of subcontracting our benefits, we're actually going to provide those benefits ourselves. Why is Amazon doing this? Why is Amazon doing this? Exactly right. Is there a commercial aspect? How is Amazon going to commercialize this, do you think? Why would they be prototyping this on their own employees? Any ideas? Any ideas? Yeah, they want to sell it to other people. So we're talking about basically getting out and competing with other companies. Think about this, guys. Amazon has very quietly started their own pharmaceutical subscription. So if you need to get prescriptions, you can get them in certain circumstances through Amazon. In Christmas of 2018, out of every $10 spent on the internet, how many of those dollars went to Amazon? $4.50. And here's the other one for you guys. Out of all the GDP moving through our lifeblood in our economy, out of our whole $20 trillion GDP, what percentage of that goes to healthcare? Talked about it a couple classes ago. Anybody have a guess? Yes?
Isn't it in the 20s?
It's 20%. So 1 out of every $5 in this country goes into healthcare. Amazon wants a piece of this pie. What do you think? Is this a good or a bad idea? Yes?
In some ways, I think it's a really good idea. Because if you're not getting excellent care from them, you're not going to use it. So they're going to be forced to provide like above average care, and it's another option. So you're not locked into like going to your local hospital. So it's going to force hospitals to find a way to compete.
So we're talking about upping competition like other businesses have had to compete with Amazon. Very good. Anybody else have an opinion? Is this a good or a bad thing? What do you think? Yes?
I feel like a lot more people are going to want to be employed by them, and the people that aren't employed by them are going to want to work extra harder, or they'll have an incentive to create new things.
So we basically could have more recruiting even for companies like Amazon. More people would be saying, I can have my health care through Amazon. Are there negative aspects?
I wanted to ask you, I feel like Amazon might become a bubble.
Anything can happen. Companies overexpand all the time. So when we think about companies that have risen and fell, at one point there was an expression that used to be used in this country: what's good for GM is good for the United States. That meant that General Motors was so tied to our economy, and our economy was so tied to General Motors. When that company was doing well, the country could say we're doing pretty well. We're hitting that point with Amazon here. So at some point, could it get too big? Could it have to sort of implode or readjust its core businesses? I think that could happen. That being said, I don't think we've ever seen a company with the reach of Amazon. We've not seen Google's before. So there's really not a prototype for this. There's not a model that we can really turn back to and say, how is this going to unfold? I think it's pretty interesting. Could have dire consequences. Does anybody think this is a bad idea? Yes?
I think Amazon might have some employees that need more health care than others, and they just might be put in an unfortunate situation if electronically is the only way that they can get their health care.
Yeah, so it could take the person out of healthcare as well. And here's the other part I see as a problem. Yes, go ahead, Jackson.
Well, I was thinking, like, so do you think they'll start forcing employees, not forcing, but they won't have that, like, regular health care through a company that they contract, rather you're going to have to use Amazon Care? Like,
I could very much see that happen.
well, so, yeah, so, I mean, as long as it's good health care and it's done by, they control it, I mean, it's not too bad with the name, but I was gonna say with this upcoming election, there's a lot of talks of making healthcare public, kind of.
Yes.
And so I don't know, it's like a really radical idea right now, but there's still support to it. So I don't know if in the long run, like if that does happen, that could really hurt this idea.
This ties directly into what's the biggest issues surrounding the 2020 election are going to be. If you guys had to think, by the way, for those of you in the room here, how many of you, by show of hands, would register to vote? If you're not registered to vote, please register to vote. Please don't let old people like me decide your fate. Decide your own fate. Well, the big issues in the coming election, most people believe are going to be the economy, healthcare, and national security. Those would be the big three issues most likely in the next election. I think Amazon's saying, let's get ahead of this. Let's see what we can do. Now, here's my fear with this particular model. And we'll talk more about the Affordable Care Act in a later class. My fear goes something like this. How does Amazon know its customers? How well does Amazon know its customers?
Better than we care about that.
Yeah, they know us very well. If you go on to Amazon, you see what your recommendations are. They're pretty well geared. So could you imagine, for example, you're logging into Amazon, you're sitting in this class, and for example, it's right before class, so you figure you might as well do some shopping. You've got Amazon Healthcare, and your message comes up and says, I see you've got hemorrhoids. So maybe you're interested in this particular product. I can see, for example, you're having this very personal problem that most people would not want to know about, and let's sell you some products to be able to help you curb that problem. Amazon's commercial interest here is if we can see somebody's got a health issue, perhaps we can market it as well. So keep your eye on this stuff, guys. The biggest commodity in 2019 and beyond is your information. We are a data-driven market, and what companies know about you is the most valuable thing they can possibly own at this point in time. Questions before we jump into it? Questions or final comments? Go once, going twice. Guys, we're going to be moving at a good clip today, and what I would really love to do, because there's quite a few people in this room whose voices I've not heard, and so I may be randomly calling on people today to keep the conversation going. The way to keep me from randomly calling on you is to participate and jump in with something you are comfortable talking about, because we may have some uncomfortable silence today. Guys, what are we talking about today? We're talking about global trade. We're going to be talking about why companies get in, what some of the things are that affect us getting into other parts of the world. We're going to be talking about trade protectionism. What's a word involving protectionism that begins with a T I'm talking about? When I talk about trade protectionism, what's the word with a T I'm talking about? If you live in China and I live in the United States, what are you slapping on my products right now? Anybody else? T word. What is it? It's tariffs. So we're going to be talking about tariffs. And we're also going to be talking about what the future is going to bring us in terms of trade. We're going to be talking about why countries have advantages, why we operate in a multinational setting, and what some of the barriers are to this trade in terms of getting into other countries. We're also, by the way, going to be talking about terrible things that we as a country do other places as well, because everybody has equal blame in this. We're also going to be talking about whether or not tariffs actually work and the advantages of common markets. Guys, there's a very big country right now. Yes, sir?
Do you have this, sorry to pull off topic, but do you have the PowerPoint uploaded to Canvas?
It should be. If it's not on, I'll make sure it is. Is it not showing up under Chapter 3? Well, guys, it'll be fixed after this class. That just means you're going to have to actually watch it and take notes here, but I'll get it to you after this class, I promise. So, guys, in terms of the business in the global market, most companies are doing business internationally at this point. Why is that, guys? Why are we all saying we are the world and getting into global markets? Yes? Exactly right. Guys, the quickest growing market in the world is not the United States. Who is it? It is China. That's the quickest growing economy in the world. We're also starting to look at things like the developing world. For example, there's a reason India and Africa are so attractive to investors, because this is going to be our next empowered class of consumers. We want to reach them. Anytime we are bringing something into the country, we're importing. If we're getting it somewhere else, if we're sending it somewhere else, we're exporting. We are the largest importer in the world. We buy from more countries than anybody else, and we're the third largest exporter. Guys, what's our big exports right now, by the way? Anybody have a guess? Like, what are the things we send to other countries all the time? Yes?
Petroleum.
You got it. We're the world's biggest supplier of petroleum. What else? Definitely oil and other things. Yes? Yep, soybeans, any kind of agricultural products. They used to call us the breadbasket of the world because we would export so much wheat and so much agricultural products. We're also the biggest exporter in many ways of technology in the form of intellectual property. Your iPhone might have been made in China, but it was invented and geared up and designed in California, USA. So we have a very strong relationship with the rest of the world. Now, in terms of population, guys, I know it's a little hard to see this, but if we look at population, the largest concentration of human beings in the world is Asia. Over 60% of the world's population lives in places like China, Russia, this entire region of the world. North America, where we're at right now, we're only 7.4% of the population. South America, 6.3%. Australia, less than 1%, half of 1%. What does it say to you about where the new global markets are going to be? It's Asia. Yeah, it's a very linear equation. That's where we need to be doing business. Now, guys, in terms of total population, in your lifetime, we're going to see the population of the world probably hit close to about 11 billion people. Guys, that's good and bad. It's good if you're a company because you can sell things. What's bad about that population growth? Yes?
More resources are needed to supply the demand.
Sooner or later, we're going to run out of food. There are some people who believe the next big wars in the world will not be fought over petroleum, but over water. Guys, in the world, more people have cell phones than running water. More people have a Facebook account than have a working toilet. That is the kind of global inequity we see at this point in time. Sooner or later, if you're in the developing world, you're going to be asking the question, why can't we have what you guys have in the United States? It's a fair question. If we say about in terms of GDP per capita, what we're saying is, based on our company's wealth, we divide it by the whole population, how much is that per person? Sweden comes in number one. Back in 2016, the U.S. value per person in Sweden was almost $51,000, $50,300. So we are not even in the top of that list. We're not even in the top 10. Number one, because we've got a lot of income inequality, but we've also got a large population compared to our GDP. So Sweden, by the way, what are the big industries in Sweden? What happens in Sweden? Anybody know? Yes?
What industry was what company?
Yeah, industries, companies. What happens in Sweden that makes them such an economic powerhouse?
I was just giving an example of a company.
Sure.
Volvo,
absolutely, and they're famous for their very safe cars. But it's a very productive company. We see a lot of companies that are headquartered in that area, for example. They got very competitive tax rates. And it's same with Switzerland, which is not in the top 10 for GDP, but a very good country nonetheless. In terms of best country for living, this is a subjective standard based on our textbook. Basically what they're saying in terms of if you accounted everything in, job stability, quality of life, income, all of these things, Germany is the best place to live in the world according to our textbook. That's very subjective. I'm not going to use that as a test question. It's something our text believes in. Now, guys, in terms of billionaires, the United States still leads in total number of billionaires. By the way, it frustrates me to no end that we've got 565 billionaires in this country. 565, probably 570 since this textbook has come out. Not one of them has chosen to be that. That keeps me up with it. If I was a billionaire, that would be my priority. But look at China, man. They're coming close to us. China's going to have as many billionaires as us very soon, and a lot of these other countries are coming along for the ride as well. So, guys, we tend to trade with countries based on what their resources are. Some countries, for example, rely too much on a single resource. Right now, in the country of Venezuela, we've got economic chaos going on. Anybody know why? What's happening in Venezuela? Yes?
Isn't our government corrupt and they're trying to get switched from communism to more democratic?
That's a great analysis. And technically, they were a socialist country, but their previous president, Hugo Chavez, made bank big time when they took over the oil companies. So basically, when the country turned socialist, the country itself took over the oil industry. Now, guys, you may not remember this well because you may not have been driving at the time. But back in the first part of the 21st century, and we're thinking about like 2005, 2006, all the way to 2010 or so, gas prices were through the roof. It was very expensive to get a tank of gas in your car. Venezuela's biggest export was oil, and they were making money hand over fist. So what the president of the country did, by seizing the oil industry, essentially took all the profits of that industry, stuck it back and artificially inflated his economy, controlled prices, and made it cheap for people to live. When the price of oil bottomed out several years ago, the economy began to crumble. That country relied so much on a single export that they've got very little else that they're exporting at this point, and that's why their economy is crumbling. That's why their inflation is going through the roof. It's becoming a very difficult place to live. It is dangerous for countries to rely on a single product for their economy. Guys, here's a flip side. Does anybody know during the economic recession why Greece had such a hard time? What's Greece's number one economic advantage? Where do they make all their money in Greece? You got it. We'd like to say it's feta cheese or olives, but it's not. It's tourism. So it's 2008. The global economy is in the tank. People who would normally go on vacation are not going on vacation. And all of a sudden, Greece has a big problem on their hands, and their economy starts to crumble. Here's the trick, guys. We talked about unemployment. In 2008, the unemployment rate in the United States topped out around 11%. In Greece, during that same period, people your age, people under the age of 25, the unemployment rate was 25%. 1 in 4 people under the age of 25 could not get a job. And that's how bad it can get when a country does not have economic diversity and when they do not have a plan for how they're going to deal with global trade. So when we talk about free trade, what we mean is a relatively smooth transition of goods and services across borders. Now, what's an advantage of free trade? There's somebody in this side of the room. If we're talking about low barriers to entry, what's an advantage to free trade? Yes?
There will just be more of it because there are barriers.
Yeah, we're gonna have more commerce going on. That's an advantage. From this side of the room, may have a disadvantage of free trade between countries. Can there be a disadvantage? What's a disadvantage, guys? What do you think, Ben? What's a disadvantage of free trade? Isn't it? If you don't know, that's okay. Can anybody help out Ben? What's a disadvantage? Well, let's say, for example, my country can make cars, and we can make them and sell them for $24,000. Your country can make cars and sell a high-quality automobile and sell them for $18,000. They're equivalent cars. Who has the advantage? You guys have the advantage because you can make a quality product less expensively than I can, and you can sell it at a profit. So free trade means that people who normally would not have to be competitive have to be competitive. Free trade gets associated with jobs leaving countries as well. In the 1990s, President Clinton signed a bill called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. What that did essentially was eliminated tariffs and boundaries to trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. We said we're going to have a free trade zone. Well, if you're a company, you're thinking to yourself, this is great. I can set up a factory anywhere, and I can move the product back and forth. If you're in a labor union, for example, you might not be so hip about that idea. Why? Why were some of the trade unions not happy about this? Who has a higher standard of living in terms of a pay wage? Somebody living in Mexico or somebody living in the United States? Yes?
United States.
Exactly right. Guys, what a lot of labor unions basically said, if you open up these barriers and you open up and get rid of the tariffs, we're going to be seeing more offshoring of labor jobs because we can make product cheaper somewhere else. And it really did happen. We had a lot of that happen. Guys, the Chevy Suburban is one of the largest SUVs on the market, and it doesn't get much more American than something that gets 12 miles to the gallon, sits 4 feet off the ground, and handles like a land yacht. If anybody owns a Suburban, I apologize. They're very big vehicles. They're made in Mexico, guys. The most American of all the SUVs is made in Mexico because it's cheaper to make it there. So that's the result of free trade as well. So on one hand, it spurs on competition because we got to be better than these guys. We got to be able to be competitive. We got to make things at a profit. On the other hand, It also means you could suffer job loss and you're going to suffer global competition. Yes?
We kind of go over this, like I've had management with Mr. Powell.
POM, yep.
I never quite got why losing jobs to overseas was such a bad thing.
Well, I think it all depends on your perspective. For example, let's put ourselves in two different perspectives here. So this side of the room, I'm going to ask you guys to say that you are high school educated blue-collar laborers. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's nothing wrong with working in honest day's work. You guys have high school degrees. You got out and you all got jobs in the local car plant. And you're making $30 an hour. You guys all went to management school. And you got your bachelor's degree. Some of you went on to got your master's degrees. Who's going to be more vulnerable to offshoring of jobs in a labor-centric industry? Who's more vulnerable? You guys are. And it's no offense to you guys, but you have no specialized training. You're replaceable. We can send that work overseas and train somebody else to do it. The people who are more adaptable with their careers, maybe not so much. That's not to say we're invincible, but it's to say we're adaptable. So generally speaking, people who have more to lose by those jobs being offshore typically have more opposition to them. Yes?
Well, when I came out of high school, I went into the workforce for a while.
Sure.
And when I did that, there's a couple other kids in my class did too. I graduated in 2016. And we got a really big pushback from teachers trying to force us into going to college, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I forget what the number is from my school. I went to Central Martinsburg.
Okay.
So, kind of a local school, but also, kind of sticks a little bit. And we were still putting, I forget what the number was, 80% of our kids into college. I just kind of don't get why it's a bad thing. Nobody wants those jobs. We're not putting high schoolers out there looking for factory work.
There is nothing dishonorable with labor work, and there's nothing wrong with going straight into the workforce. If that's what somebody wants to do, they should do it. My return to that is just based on the vulnerable economy we live in today. There are going to be some people who want to go for white-collar jobs. There's people who want to be in management. Obviously, we got a lot of folks in this room who want to be in white-collar types of professions. That's why you're in college. There's nothing wrong with trades either, though, and they're equal but different. When I say this, I don't have a snob attitude whether or not somebody went to college or not. It comes down to a lot of people are self-made people. Elon Musk from Tesla said if he had a choice between two people, one with a college degree and no experience, and one who could walk through the door and program for him and come up with good ideas, he'd rather have the person without a degree. Most people, I'm putting myself in that category, need some kind of training to be ready for the workforce. Whether that is learning how to be a mechanic or whether that's learning how to be a manager, there's nothing wrong with either path. I think we in high schools have sent people to college who should not have gone to college. It's not the right path. And we've also disincentivized people from going to college because we didn't feel that they met the criteria of the standard. I'm proud of the fact I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. My mom worked in a factory, and both paths are honorable and good. There's nothing wrong with either. You got to do what's right for you. So, sorry for that tirade, guys. I really think that in this current economy, there's room for all of us. We just have to find out where. Any other questions before we keep moving? Good questions, good feedback this morning, guys. We're moving at a good clip. We're going to hit a couple more slides before I open it up for a question. Guys, in terms of comparative advantage, what that means is how do you stack up against another country? If you're in the United States, for example, we're lucky. We have great natural resources here. If you want to build stuff in this country, we have an easy time doing it. You can get lumber. We have large amounts of oil and petroleum products. We can power our economy. Now let's think about that, and let's compare it to the island nation of Japan. If you want to build in Japan, where are you getting your trees and your building? Yeah, exactly right. You're importing. In fact, in Japan, if you want to know why Japan relies so heavily on atomic power, it's because they have next to no petroleum. If you're a small island nation like Japan, you're importing almost everything. So you have a very little competitive advantage when it comes to natural resources, which is why you build it up on things like economic power and intellectual capital. Now, we say a country has an absolute advantage if they have a monopoly or close to a monopoly. The United States and Saudi Arabia, for example, with the amount of petroleum we have, we have near absolute advantages compared to a lot of other countries. You know who else has a significant advantage in this regard is Russia, the former Soviet Union. They have large deposits of natural gas. The Ukraine, not so much. The Ukraine, which used to be a part of the Soviet Union, two or three winters ago when the Soviet Union, Russia rather, was trying to put pressure on Ukraine, in the middle of the winter, they shut off the gas lines and basically said, we're going to smoke you out. That's when an economic advantage turns into a political leverage situation as well. In terms of who we owe money to, guys, because we're talking about national debt, national deficits, despite all these wonderful things we have in our favor, we owe a lot of people money. We owe China trillions of dollars. We owe Japan trillions of dollars. And some of these other countries owe us money as well. Guys, here's another trick, too. We have a lot of folks who from our country, go to school other places, and people who come to school here. International students are one of the smallest and most informal groups of importers, exporters in the world because you find things you like in other countries and you bring them back and forth. This is a true story, guys. I'll go back to my era, the 1980s and 1990s. Back in that era, what was the #1 brand of blue jeans in the world? What did everybody want to wear? You got it. Levi's, and they were still made in America at that point. They were made in San Francisco. You could go to a mall at Christmas time and take an old pair of your Levi's you didn't want anymore, and you could sell them, even if they had holes in them and the seams were gone, because they would repair them and sell them in Russia because they had just gotten the start of a global economy. So they weren't yet a capitalist system. Free trade wasn't that big of a thing. And so even at that point in time, somebody else's cast-offs tend to be treasures to other people. We export goods and services because it provides jobs for us too, guys. Here's the trick. In China, we sell Buicks and Jeeps that are made in the United States. We sell products that are made here all over the world. And it's a big part of the entire global trade. Now, in terms of balance of trade, we're going to take our first break after this slide. If you are selling more to other countries than you're importing, you've got what we refer to as a favorable balance of trade. It's good. You're selling more than you're buying. That's what we refer to as a trade surplus. If we are buying more from other countries than we are selling, we're operating at a trade deficit. And if you recall, guys, we are the #1 importing and #3 exporting country in the world. So we've been operating at a trade deficit for a very long time in this country. Now, when I say this, this does not constitute a political slam or endorsement. One of the big things that the current president of the United States said when he came to office is he wanted to return us to more manufacturing. A lot of people are basically saying that's not possible in a current global economy because from a labor standpoint, we cannot compete. I leave that up to your own consciences to decide whether or not you believe one side of that or the other. But the bottom line, it has been a very big political issue. We're going to stop now for a question or a comment from each side of the room. I'd love to hear from you this morning. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on homeowners associations?
Oh boy, so people who tell you what you can and can't do with your yard?
Yes.
I've never been asked this question before. It was funny. I think that sometimes I've never lived in a neighborhood where we had one of those. I've always had pretty much free reign. And people in my neighborhood, for example, do giant inflatable things in their yard at Christmas time and do crazy stuff with their homes. On one hand, I can see where people would want to maintain a standard for their property values. On the other hand, I don't want to have to. I don't have to go through paperwork if I want to decorate my house for Christmas. If you're ever around my neighborhood at Christmas time, here's how you'll know it. Because normal people put up things like Santa Claus or a reindeer. My wife and I put Darth Vader in front of our house. And we actually put like a Christmas wreath around his head and stuff. So we're those people in our neighborhood. So I guess I wouldn't get along too well with homeowners associations.
Yeah.
What do you think?
A little bit I know about. I don't think I like it that much.
I'm thinking about getting a giant 6-foot inflatable Batman to put next to Darth Vader this year. My wife thinks that might be a bit much, and she said it might be in bad taste. We'll see how that works out. So what is this side of the room? What would you guys like to ask me today? Question or comment? Anything. Nothing is off the table, guys. I'm dying to know. What would you like to ask? Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard the ringing all morning?
The ringing.
Yeah, there's something when you come over here and talk.
I have noticed that, and it's like I don't know what's causing it this morning. I didn't think my voice was that powerful. I don't know. Maybe I've got like some sort of superpower or something. Maybe it is, but I've been hearing it bouncing off the walls too. What do you think it is? It's kind of annoying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I was thinking it's the microphone.
You think?
Yeah.
Wow. Anything's possible. Hello? Check. Keep hearing it, let me know. If you guys hear the voices I hear in my head too, let me know. So they sometimes tell me to burn things and stuff. I'm trying to not do that. Anyway, guys, in terms of, the voices in my head tell me to burn things. That's going to come back on my idea route for sure. Guys, in terms of balance of payments, again, this ties into whether or not we got a trade deficit or a trade surplus. When we start talking about balance of payments, what we do essentially is take all the money that's coming into our country versus all the money that's going out. And this accounts for everything. Not just commercial sales, not just factories, everything. Do we have more money coming in or going out? That determines our balance of payments. So a trade surplus versus a trade deficit strictly is on goods and services. Balance of payments can be everything. For example, the United States, we provide a lot of money to other countries in the form of economic aid, for example. We do economic aid, we fight wars, we do grants and endowments to other places. We invest in foreign countries as well. So balance of payments takes all of those things into account. If you go to just global national aid, the United States is one of the most generous nations in the world. We don't get a lot of press for that because we've got other things that make the news, but we do give a lot of money and we do provide a lot of help. In fact, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, typically speaking, and when I say this, I never mean these, I'm not setting political judgment on anybody's beliefs, but there are stereotypes. There are stereotypes that people who are Democrats tend to be more pro-aid than Republicans. George Bush, for example, the last President Bush, put more foreign direct investment into fighting AIDS on the African continent than any president prior or since. So you can't always judge somebody just by their political stripes. Sometimes people do things that don't always fit in. We're going to cover the top 10 exercise in the next class. We're not going to be dealing with that. Actually, we'll cover that on Monday. We're not going to deal with it today. Guys, in terms of what we refer to as an unfair trade practice, I would remember this term. It's called dumping. It's a wonderful economic term. I would even write it down. Dumping. Dumping means when you flood an economy with something you want to get rid of in the attempt to kill somebody else's industry. It happened here in the 1970s. What is the name of the most popular sports team in this region?
Steelers.
It's the Steelers. No matter if you love them or hate them, they are one of the most popular sports teams in the country, and people in this region absolutely go bananas for them. Well, in the 1970s, Japanese steel imports, the Japanese companies were dumping steel into our markets, and that cheap steel basically helped kill the steel industry. When you're dumping, it means you're trying to kill somebody else's industry. We do it all the time. Countries do it all the time. If you can take over somebody else's industry, you can do it. We're not the only ones who have been victims. Other people in other countries have done those things as well. So if we start talking, because we're talking about free trade today, guys, our biggest trading partners in the world are still our top three. Remember this. Our top three are Canada, Mexico, and China. Their positions flip-flop sometimes. I just heard that. I heard it there. That's a really weird sound. The positions they occupy move from time to time. We do a heck of a lot of trade with Canada on everything from cars to dairy products, and Mexico is the same deal. If you want to know why we can have strawberries in the middle of February, thank our neighbors to the south because they've got favorable growing conditions. So the reason we enjoy the variety we enjoy in our supermarkets is because we have global trade on those levels as well. When we're trying to get into foreign markets, we're trying to get into global markets, we refer to this as a continuum. This is a continuum of ways in which countries can do business in other countries. They go from the least risky and the least labor intensive to the whole way to the most. And we're going to cover those. Does anybody here today have a professional sports piece of apparel? Is anybody representing a professional or college team? I see some St. Francis logo. What are we wearing today?
No, it said team after. It's not a team, it's a person.
Okay, so what are you representing today? You got those are Jordans, aren't they? Very nice, absolutely. Anybody else got like We got some St. Francis apparel today. Anybody? We got St. Francis Field Hockey. We're representing here. You guys are doing all kinds of things with licensed apparel. St. Francis didn't make that sweatshirt. Michael Jordan certainly didn't make those shoes, but his logo and a likeness are on them. We license these to other companies to make products bearing our logo, and it's the easiest way to get into a foreign market. We can license the Nike swoosh to be sold anywhere in the world and be reproduced. If I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I can license my logo to be put on sweatshirts and produced in Bangladesh and sold in Japan if I want to. It's the easiest way to get in because all you have to do is say yes and wait for the checks. Is there a disadvantage to this type of approach? Is there something that can happen to you? Yes? Quality for sure. Is there another thing too? Yes?
Like knockoff brands get started.
Boom. My wife is a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and she wanted. I think she was big into Troy Polamalu for a long time. It must be the hair. I don't know. But she bought a Troy Polamalu jersey. She bought it online, and it was not a Reebok jersey. It was a Reeboy jersey. It looked an awful lot like a Reebok jersey or a Nike jersey, but it was Reeboy. You couldn't tell the difference with a real NFL jersey, and she bought it online. So it came down to, yes, we have problems controlling that kind of licensing. And here's the trick. If I license a product and it gets sold halfway across the world, what's my mechanism for enforcement? I hope I've got a good agreement between my country's embassy or my trade embassy with whatever country these products are being sold in, because it can be very difficult to maintain that kind of intellectual property. You guys may or may not have heard about this, but in the 1970s, there was a little movie that turned the world on its ear and involved science fiction and Darth Vader. What movie am I talking about? There were millions of bad knockoffs of Star Wars made in foreign countries, many of them coming from India, for example, because they would take stock footage, or people literally would go to theaters playing Star Wars, record the scenes with X-Wing fighters, and cut them into their own movies and resell them as Star Wars. Because is anybody from Hollywood going to Indian cinema and busting people for showing bootlegs? No, it's very hard to maintain that intellectual property. So we have stuff that makes its way across the world that basically we have very little control over. The next level is what we refer to as exporting. And exporting is simply you're making a product and you're sending it somewhere else. That can be very difficult as well. Well, what's difficult about sending a product from one country to another? What expense do we add immediately? You got to get it from one place to another. And then we get into customs. For example, are you selling products that have components that we don't allow in this country? Some countries, for example, have very strict rules on nutrition, and they don't want things like genetically modified organisms, GMOs, that we have commonly in our food in the United States, don't make the cut in other countries. So there could be very specific reasons why we can't import or export into a given area. And then we get into tariffs. For example, in the United States, let's say, for example, I have a very strong agricultural trade. When people start thinking about low-fat meats they can eat, things that are good for them, they don't think of beef, they typically think of what? Chicken. Everybody loves chicken, right? So we have a lot of chicken in this country, and we make so much of it, we export it other places. Well, if I'm exporting to your country, and I've got so much of this, I can sell it for $2 a pound, and you can't. Your local farmers are taking a beating because we're sending American chicken over for $1 less a pound. You're probably going to slap tariffs on my exports as well. We're going to be talking about something called the chicken tax, too. Then we get into something called franchising. Franchising simply means you've come up with a way to take something you've invented and reproduce it somewhere else. You control the system, and you essentially charge somebody sort of a subscription fee for setting up a franchise and running your operation. When we think about franchising in the United States, what's the biggest brand we think of? You got it. McDonald's. They're everywhere, guys. Well, here's the trick. When you operate in other countries, you've got to sometimes change what you sell. For example, if I decided I was opening a McDonald's in Tel Aviv, Israel, what's a product I would never sell? I'm sorry? Well, I could sell burgers, but what kind of burgers could I not sell? Couldn't sell cheeseburgers, because in the Jewish faith, you do not mix meat and cheese. I also could not sell somebody a milkshake with their hamburger meal. So you've got to adapt based on regional tastes and also based on what regional requirements might be. Here's an example. If you go to Taiwan, these are some flavors you'll find in Dunkin' Donuts. You know, we don't see a lot of honeydew melon or green apple flavored donuts in the Altoona Dunkin' Donuts. If we go over to Domino's, to other places, for example, in Japan, we can get beef topping, we get shrimp, mayonnaise flavor, why not? And why not some snow crab and shrimp? If you go to McDonald's, for example, depending where you're going, my favorite for my friends from Europe, I wish I could get a beer when I go to McDonald's here, but you can get one in Germany. We switch based on local tastes. And so it also comes down to, for example, if you've got vegetarian cultures, you might have to deal with this as well. You may say to yourself, what in God's name is this? What this is sold in Pizza Hut, Japan, and this is called the Mega Pie, the Mega Pizza. And it is kind of a stereotype of how people in Japan think Americans eat. It's probably not all that far off. But it comes down to, check this out, the crust is actually made out of miniature stuffed pastries with hot dogs in them. So that's the crust. You've got hamburger patties on top of it. You got pepperoni, cheese, and anything you can possibly throw on it. That's a little terrible, right? I'd try it. But I think it's awesome that that's what our perception is in the world, that that's how we eat all the time. And check this out, guys. If you want to talk about licensing and franchising, for example, Transformers were a flop when they debuted in 1983 in Japan. Kids had no interest in them. They exported them to the United States and licensed the brand to Hasbro. It was a huge hit in the United States. And check this out. The cartoon that came out in the United States was a big hit. We exported the cartoon and the whole storyline back to Japan. So Transformers had to become a hit in America before they were a hit in Japan. Anybody a fan of the Transformers movies at all? Yeah, so it's kind of cool to know that it was an American cultural explosion that turned Transformers into a hit in Japan. Guys, one or two more slides. We get past, because we're still on the continuum, we went from exporting to licensing and all these different ways in which we can get to other countries. We can also do something called contract manufacturing. What that means is I might want to enter a foreign market by actually setting up a factory there and having somebody else do it for me. One of the biggest users of contract manufacturing in the world is Apple. Does anybody know who they work with to make iPhones in China? Foxconn, one of the biggest technology subcontractors in the world. We do contract manufacturing they do contract manufacturing for Apple. What's wonderful about it is somebody else has to do the heavy lifting. Somebody else knows how to do local business. And we can get into that market without having to build a factory ourselves. You can give up some control, however, and there have been quality control issues with companies who've gotten into contract manufacturing. But here's some examples of contract manufacturing that's happened. I don't know if you can see this, but this Jeep has a Mitsubishi logo on the front of it. This was made in post-World War II Japan. Jeep actually subcontracted manufacture to Mitsubishi Corporation, who made Jeeps right after World War II. It happened here too. AMC, American Motors Corporation, ironically the parent company of Jeep up until the late 1980s, did contract manufacturing for a French car company called Renault and made Renault automobiles in the United States. And of course, Japan published Bat manga, so there were Batman comics that were published in Japan that were reprints of American comics translated into Japanese. That's a wonderful place for us to stop today, guys. I will see you on Friday. Yes, sir.